Hello, welcome to this evening's Qandor webinar on planning gain, how to maximise the most out of existing planning applications. Just a quick welcome. If you have any questions for the panel during the webinar, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Questions can be asked during the discussion or kept until the Q&A session at the end. And join the conversation on LinkedIn, click on the link to chat, basically just to let people know that you're here and discuss any sort of further ideas that you might have after the event. But if you can keep your main questions to the Q&A section, then that'll allow us to get the most out of the session towards the end. So quick introduction from me. My name is Neil Scroxton. I am the Managing Director of Scroxton Partners. We are architects, we're planners, and we're construction managers. I'm just going to quickly share my screen with you so that I can run through a couple of slides. Hopefully everyone can see this. So who am I? So I'm the Managing Director of Scroxton Partners. And I've been running the company for over 10 years now. I've been in the construction industry myself for about 25 years. And I started working on design-led planning opportunities at the age of 18. We regularly advise clients on pre-purchase stage on the commercial reality of projects, and we regularly rescue projects that have been designed by others to be non-viable. And talking about planning gain, we've got a couple of great presenters with us today. We've got David Kemp from DRK Planning, and we've got Evan Maindonald from Melt Property, both very, very good at finding that little bit of extra profit, a little bit of extra GDV in a project. But when we talk about planning gain, it's essentially the fiscal gain at the front end of a project. And we find it through manipulation of both statutory planning systems and project strategy. When we talk about it in the office, we think about it on sort of three key areas. We're either looking to improve the design to reduce the build cost but retain the target GDV, or improve the design within the existing envelope to increase GDV while holding the build cost at the same level, or improve the policy-driven strategy to increase units, potentially affecting the residual land value, the build cost, or the GDV. And a lot of you will want to know how to achieve planning gain. And the very short answer is, and may sound a bit arrogant, but it's the reality. You need to employ a better team. And when you're searching for opportunities, there are things that you can find that may steer you in the right direction. So look for what I'd call naive planning applications where land values have been killed, and a really simple thing there may be that densities on the site are nowhere near where they should be, and you can find that information in your local core strategy. Look for inexperienced teams. Look for small teams, guys that just don't have the projects behind them to have discovered where to tease extra bits out of projects. Look for consultants that claim 100% success rate. This is a massive bugbear of mine, and something that I will often be telling people. If you're working with someone that says they have 100% success rate, they are not working hard enough for you. Your team needs to use not necessarily failure, but they need to find the line. We've got to work out where local authorities accept the margins to be, and if you're always working at 100% success rate, that means you're not testing those lines and pushing hard enough. And a good way to see that, if you're looking at applications online, is look for applications that have small levels of activity. If a project went in and was passed without a case officer or a neighbour or anybody else raising a concern, there is definitely some money left on the table there. Look for viability studies on applications outside of major cities. To be quite frank, you shouldn't be submitting viability studies on applications unless you have a major cost on a site, like a clear up or something unforeseen. If it's a standard project and it's got a viability study attached to it, there's probably something in there. and look for sites that have been on the market for a long time, because again, that normally means that the scheme that's been designed is not going to, is not ticking the right boxes, and there's an opportunity there. And also, the last point to realise is that sometimes actually understanding less is more. I'm looking at a scheme at the moment that is for 40 plus flats, and when you go into this is a classic one, got a viability study attached to it. When you go into the viability study, you can see that the unit sizes are all 20% too big. Some of the 2 beds are, they've got a sale price at £109 per square foot and a build cost of £150 per square foot. There is no value in the project whatsoever. So stepping back actually will increase the land value on that particular one.
Hi, I hope you're enjoying the free content. My name is Matt Siddell. I started Qandor in 2017. In 2020, we launched a property academy called Tropolis. If you want to know how you can come and join our fantastic network and work with the wonderful people that we help and support, then click the link below and book your call with me today.
So like I said, I've got 2 great speakers today. We've got Evan Maindonald, who is the CEO of Melt. So just a quick introduction to Evan. He is, since the last 19 years or so, they've built over 100 properties in London, Gloucestershire, and Kent, and they have currently on the table projects of over £100 million in GDV, and a pipeline of 200 million in GDV. I think it's fair to say that at the moment, these guys are hot enough to reconsider a name change to Boiling Point instead of Melt, because they really are killing it. And in the group, they're well known within the Qandor group, and certainly a lot of us aspire to some of the projects that they put together. So, Evan, would you like to jump in with your presentation?
Absolutely. Thank you, and thank you for the invite, Neil. Now, I need to work out a screen share as well, so I'm just going to do that. And you should all be able to see my presentation. So I'm going to be talking today about how we drive value enhancement in the projects that we do. And I just, Neil's given me a very quick introduction, but I'll give you a little bit more detail on who we are and what we do. Once I get these slides to roll, give me 1 second. Here we go. So the company was formed in 2002, and we originally started doing residential property development. We have moved into doing residential and commercial development, and we have a particular focus on the apart hotel sector. Our current projects, as Neil said, are around just over 100 million in GDV, and we have a pipeline of projects that we're targeting that should take us over 200 million by the end of this year. We've got £30 million in equity in those projects from investors. We agreed a new £15 million equity facility with a family office who we already work with, and a leading European real estate private equity fund last year. So that puts us in a position to deliver on that large pipeline that we're targeting. We're about to launch a sustainable property bond for high net worth and sophisticated investors, and that will really be around our philosophies, which are about design-led development, which is what drives value, but also about sustainability and driving efficiencies in construction through modular, as well as reducing the amount of carbon that's in the properties that we build. There are 3 central philosophies that we have as a company. One is we call design-led development, and I'm going to talk about that a lot tonight because that's essentially what this is about. That's what we do as a company. Another one is sustainability, and that's about how we build sustainability into the properties that we build, but we do it in a manner that's economically sustainable. So we deliver value to the people that buy our properties by doing that, and we get more for our properties by doing that. And so that's, in a way, part of design-led development. The other piece is what we call systematic construction, and that's really around a focus on modular construction, but modular construction doesn't work for every property, and so, or for every development. And so it's about systemizing construction to the greatest degree that we possibly can using up-to-date construction techniques. Value enhancement is core to our business, and it's core to our business for a number of reasons. One is that it drives risk reduction. So if we can enhance the value of the sites that we buy, it means we have more margin in them, and that means there's more margin for error. So if our costs end up being higher than we anticipated, or we find something that we weren't aware of during the course of development, it means we've got more ability to absorb that, and it makes us a more resilient business. But I think it's important in more ways than that. It's easy to think about value enhancement as just being about money. And for us, there are some things that sit behind that. One of them is about making the most efficient use of the sites that we buy and that we develop. And when we have a housing crisis and a housing shortage in the UK, it is responsible to make the most of the sites that you develop. You know, if you can get 50 units out of a site rather than 30, then it's actually socially responsible to do that. Otherwise, we're not making the most of the things we have. We're wasting them. But I think beyond that, the design-led philosophy that we have is about making sure that what we build is most appropriate for the people that we use it. So in terms of residential property, the occupiers, in terms of commercial property, it works best for the people that use it. So we make the best use of the sites and the land that we have available, and that means we deliver maximum value. The two go hand in hand. A couple of projects that we're doing at the moment, this is a CGI of a development that we're doing in Gloucester that I'll talk about in a minute, that we've used this value enhancement design-led development philosophy on. This is another site that we're in joint venture with a family office on in Kennington and SW9. I'll talk a bit more about that later in the presentation. So to get onto the meat of the topic, driving value, I've talked about design-led development, and that's a philosophy that runs through everything that we do. But what does that really mean? And where does design come into the process, into the development process? So I talk about something called triple optimization. So we optimize at 3 levels. We optimize at the level of the project. So when we look at a site, and in fact, even before we buy a site, before we commit to buying a site, we target sites that have potential for value enhancement via planning. So there are a number of ways to deliver that. One is by getting more square footage on the site. One is by getting a higher value per square foot out of whatever you've got on the site. And I think really, in terms of value enhancement, those are the main things that drive value in terms at the project level. But there's also an optimization at a plot level. So you can add more square footage at the project level potentially, or you can reconfigure what you've got to a different use. But you can also optimize individual properties. So for example, if you've got a really large 2-bed flat, if you optimize it down to a smaller size, you can get a higher price per square foot. And then finally, there's an optimization at the end of the process, which is really about making the properties fit as closely as possible to what it is that the people who are going to buy them or rent them actually want. So to maximize the value for the person that ends up using or inhabiting the property. And so design-led development to us means using design at every stage of the process to drive value at the project level, at the individual plot level, and then in terms of the individual proposition to whoever is going to buy or use that property. I'd like to talk about planning strategy rather than tactics. And I've said something here, which is building platforms. Essentially, when we look at planning, we're not saying, here's a site, we want to get a consent on it. We sit back and we think, okay, this is where we want to get to. What's the best way to get there? And when I talk about building platforms, what I mean is, if you can establish a certain planning consent, then you can't roll back from that. Once you've got that consent, the planners can't take it off you. But what you can do is you can regard that as a platform, as a starting point for another consent. And so if you think that what you want to do might be too much for the planners at the outset, then often the best way to get there is in a series of steps. And I'll talk about how that can work in a practical sense when I come to talk about our Lime Grove development. But I think it's important when you're looking at value enhancement to set your planning strategy out from the outset. So it's not just one application or one thing that you do. It's a question of a series of things that you do that get you from A to B. You'll have some uncertainty in that process. And so what you need to do when you set out your strategy is say, what happens if X happens? So in other words, if we make this application and they refuse it, what do we do? Do we have time to sit on the thing and wait for an appeal? Can we do something else in parallel while that's happening? And that is what we do when we are evaluating projects. We look at how we set up a planning strategy, and we build platforms on our way to get to the ultimate goal.
I think that's a great point you bring up there, Evan, particularly for young, more novice developers. I think there is a tendency, there is a psychology that you have to go out and get the best thing straight away, and your offer should be based on absolutely smashing a site to pieces and getting everything out of it on day one, and if for some reason that doesn't come through, then it's the planners are terrible, or your team's got it all wrong. But that idea of building up the level, like you say, the levels, the sort of complexity of the project, to just squeeze that little bit more out as you go along, rather than loading your offer at the front end and struggling further down the line.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's about building new base points. So when you start, you're at a base point. When you buy the site, you're at a base point. When you've got a consent, you're at a new base point. You've moved on, and so you need to look at where you go from that point onwards. It's interesting, actually, because when I did my first multi-site development in Gloucestershire, we got on site very quickly, because there's this thing that you want to just start working and doing stuff. There's this feeling like if you're not, actually got a spade in the ground, then actually you're not making progress. But actually, we do the opposite of that these days. We buy stuff, and we quite often sit on it while we work through all the issues, because actually it became clear to me when I was doing that development that we left a lot on the table because we didn't sit back and optimize the value of the site before we actually started work. And once you build something, you can't unbuild it.
Yeah. Sorry, just before you jump on to the next bit, I've got a bit of a juicy question for you here. From AJ. Is it good to place responsibility for visualization on the future development? Is that good to place it with the architect, or should it come from the developer?
If you've got a really good architect, they can give you ideas, but I think the developer has to drive this process. I would even go so far as to say, I don't let our planning consultants or our architects drive this process. I tell them what it is that we want. I let them come up with ideas, and I work with them on it. But ultimately, I think as a developer, you have to drive the strategy. And I think it's a mistake to allow any professional to take that over, because planning consultants are specialists in planning. Architects are specialists in design. None of them are specialists in development. What development is about, if you ask me, is about extracting the maximum value from what you do. And that requires a combination of all those disciplines.
Yeah, I think sort of stepping in from the view of an architect, who often leads commercial teams. You're not when you the question, should an architect drive it? It's more about, should you work with the right guys that understand how to drive commercial decisions, and how to help squeeze that out.
Right. So that's no, absolutely, and that's a different question. So some architects are good at this, but most aren't. Yeah. So I think it's really key to find a good architect who understands value enhancement, and I think it is. I think you just because somebody is an architect doesn't mean that they're thinking about the financials of a project. And in my experience, it's more the exception than the norm that architects do that. And same with planning consultants.
Yeah, no, I would tend to agree. And then another quick question here from Paul, just asking whether or not there are any certain planning authorities, or London boroughs, that encourage the value-led approach, and which public authorities are thought leaders in this area.
I don't think there are any. I think you can make the assumption that planning authorities are. Well, Tory-led councils are more likely to be sympathetic towards development than Labour-led councils in general, or Green-led councils. But the planning system is there, it's a system of law, and the planners are there to effectively regulate the system. But generally, the experience is that they don't like the idea that developers make profit. I mean, we need to, clearly. But so, I talked earlier in the presentation about the reasons behind value enhancement. And so when we're talking to planners, I think the message that it's about making the most out of each individual site is they're much more receptive to that than talking about money, because councils don't like it when you make money.
No, it goes down to, and again, if you look at viability studies and look at what gets attached as developer profits, you can finance most deals if you try to work within the realm that the local authorities believe that you should be working in. So
yeah, and I'm being careful about some of the things that I'm saying tonight because, and it's one of the reasons why developers often don't talk about this stuff, because I think it can impact on your viability assessment for a site if the council thinks you're making too much money out of it. Anyway, so just to come on from that strategy and tactics thing to essentially the types of sites that we look for, because this is also really how we drive value enhancement. It's in selecting the right sites. The first thing is they've got to have a workable base case. In other words, we won't buy anything unless for more than it's worth in its current value or with its current planning consent. It has to make a profit based on either the planning consent it's got or whatever it is, because that's our worst case, that's our downside. If we can't get an enhancement, that's what we do. So that has to work. Otherwise, our business isn't sustainable. We can't afford to take a loss on anything. So that can be based either on its existing consent or its current use value. If it's got income, in other words, if there's a tenant in there or it's income producing in some other way, that de-risks the thing, because it means you can afford to hang on, and particularly if that income covers the cost of holding the property, whatever your interest is on the loan, then it de-risks the timing. You can afford to hang around and wait as long as you need to get the planning that you want. I like to say that we look for sites that have a little hair, but not too much. So you want to avoid ones that look like this, Ned Kelly, but ones that look like that are okay. Now that's a really vague term, but what I mean by that is perfect sites don't have potential for enhancement because somebody's already gone and enhanced all the value out of them, or the money to be made is where there are problems. But if the problems are too big or too difficult to solve, then that's going too hairy, and it's very difficult to get people to buy into that. And actually, if there's risk involved, you probably shouldn't be doing it either. So what we look for is stuff that sits in the margins. We don't look for stuff that's perfect because there's no money to be made in that. We don't look for stuff that's really difficult because it's too risky. We look for stuff that's in the middle. And the way that I like to say that is about 3 days growth, although that guy's probably got a bit longer than that. So it's resolvable problems that other people find daunting, things that put other people off, but you know that you can find a solution to. It's also about, in some ways, seeing patterns. So one of the things that I will say in conclusion is in a couple of slides time is that you need to practice this thing to get it better at it. It's a combination of an art and a science. So, and when you look at more and more sites, you see the same things over and over again. So, for example, looking at sites in central London, you might see that if the buildings around them are taller, you've got potential maybe to put an additional story on the building that you're looking at. Another common thing in London is if you've got in certain parts of London, so for example in central London, where you've got a big differential between per square foot end values and per square foot build costs, you can potentially add a lot of value by putting a basement in, because although basements are expensive, where you've got high per square foot end values, you can justify the cost of that. Another thing to look for is on outline planning consents outside London, so on residential schemes. Often outline planning consents have a level of vagueness associated with them that means there's significant potential for increasing value with a simple reserve matters application. So find opportunity in difficult sites. Look for ones that hang around. What you don't want to be doing is you don't want to be competing with a lot of people to buy something. What you really want to do is just be patient. So we never bid on sites that are really widely marketed or have just launched or that there's a huge amount of interest on. We might look at them, but we will just sit back and wait and see what happens. If somebody wants to buy it and pay over the odds for it, that's fine. If it sits around for 6 months or a year and nobody buys it, by that point, the vendor's going to be in a mood to take a knockdown offer for it. And so I think that is what we would call provenance in a way, or it feeds into provenance in a way. So we'll look at stuff that nobody else is looking at because it gives us a runway to work out what we could do with it and work out how we can add value to it. Or we look at stuff that's off market. So stuff that comes to us through somebody that we know, and that's what we call provenance. It's a question of where the site came from and what's happening with it. And that's for us important in locating value, because actually a lot of being able to value enhance sites is to buy stuff at a good price in the first place. If you pay too much for it, it's going to be very difficult to add any value to it. And another thing that you really need to get comfortable with if you think about value enhancement is what we call optionality. So it's about looking at probability. In essence, I think probably the best way that I can put this is we look for one-way bets, but the bets don't. If there are more options and more possibilities, that's a great thing, because it means if we go after one strategy and that fails, we can go to another strategy. So, for example, I'll talk about a site in a minute where we're applying for an apart hotel consent. That site would also get a resi consent. So if we don't get the apart hotel consent, then one possible fallback strategy for us would be to apply for residential consent. So you need to embrace the different possibilities and be comfortable with the fact that there's not just one outcome. It's not rigid. The fact that there are lots of different things that you could do with something is actually a plus. But I think when I talked about one-way bets earlier, what I was really referring to is making sure that there's a workable base case. If you've got something you can fall back on and you know you can make profit on that, but you also know there's potential for an enhancement, that's a one-way bet. You can't lose money on it, but you could make a lot. And if you do 4 or 5 of those, then 80% of them are going to work. Maybe one of them won't. So then generally the way that these things work is it doesn't work out exactly as you planned it in the first place, but there is a route through to enhancement, maybe one you didn't see when you bought the site. So just to talk about an example. This is a site that we're currently developing in Gloucester. I showed you a CGI of it earlier in the presentation. When we bought the site, it had an outline consent for 10 new build houses, and the conversion of this building, it's a former school building, into 2 large semi-detached units. Now, the first thing that was obvious to us when we were looking at it is this outline planning consent envisaged 12,500 square feet, and that's what the valuation was based on. If you look at this site, it's a large site. There's clearly a lot of space on it. 12 houses at 12,500 square feet is just over 1,000 square feet per house. So 1,000 square foot house is a 3-bed terraced house. These are clearly not small 3-bed terraced houses. And so it was obvious to us that you could fit a lot more on that site than the outline planning envisaged. And so the first thing that we did when we bought it was we put in a reserve matters application for exactly what the outline consent envisaged. We ended up with 12 houses and 18,600 square feet. What we also noticed is that there was quite a bit of space on the site. We had a TPO protected tree just here, and it was obvious to us also that 2 large semi-detached units wasn't the best use of this former school building. So we did 2 things. We put an application in to convert the school building into 7 flats, and we put an application in to remove the TPO protected tree and build 2 new houses up here. We ended up coming to an agreement with the council's tree officer to remove the TPO protected tree in return for a £20,000 contribution towards tree planting elsewhere in Gloucestershire, and essentially freed up 2 plots, which the residual value of which was about £70,000 each. So what we ended up with here is 12 houses and 7 flats and a total of 25,000 square feet. We bought the site for 725,000. The residual value of the site when we'd done all this was 1.35 million. The original GDV was 3.5 million. The GDV was about, with these enhancements, was about 7.2 million. We planned this in steps. So we did this step first, then we did the flats, and then we did this piece. So we built a platform, and then we built on that platform. And what that meant was we could actually start developing the site out while we were pursuing the enhancements. It didn't hold us up. So when I talk about planning strategy earlier on in the presentation, that's what I meant. We thought about this is where we want to go, and in fact, with this one, unusually, it worked out exactly as we planned it. So very quickly, a couple of other projects where we took a similar approach. I mentioned the apart hotel in Kennington earlier. When we bought that originally, it had a consent for 32 flats over the existing commercial business, so that had about 42,000 square feet. It had a defective planning consent, so the consent went into the airspace of the adjoining property and a right-of-way through the site that actually might have prevented the planning consent from being implemented. So when I talked about sites being a bit hairy earlier on, that's what I meant. This was one that put other people off because those were difficulties that other people struggle to cope with. What it had as plus is it had existing commercial and residential tenants, so there's income from the site. So we knew if we bought it, we could hang around, and we wouldn't be in a position where we had money leaking out of the site on interest. Where we've ended up in terms of the planning application that we have in the moment, or what we will end up getting on the site, one way or another, whether it's commercial or resi, basement for car parking, we'll probably end up going for a 3-level basement, office use on the ground floor. It was obvious to us actually that the building hadn't optimized the space, so there was space to add floors within the existing approved envelope. So we're going to end up with something that's 100,000 square feet plus. It'll take the GDV up from around 22 million to actually the figure we're looking at on the current consent is about 49 million. We can potentially enhance that further up to maybe 60 million, taking the profit on cost up from 17% up to well in excess of 50%. We've got heads of terms in place with 2 tenants, so essentially we've pre-let it. And what that means is that we can de-risk the project by forward funding it as soon as we get the planning in place. So this is all about maximising value and minimising risk on the way through. Another one that we're currently in the process of acquiring, it's a residential development in Gloucestershire. It's got a current consent for over 100 units. It's a very, very complex acquisition. And what that means is that we can actually position ourselves as the only entity that can solve those problems. And so by getting ourselves into a position where we're able to solve those problems, we're able to buy the site at under red book value, there's an opportunity to enhance the gross development value on that site from around about 45 million to about 75 million. And that is really just about optimizing the properties on site. It's about getting more space, and it's about delivering a development which has higher value to the people that will sell it to. So just to summarize, some takeaways on how this process works from our perspective. Look for the opportunity behind every problem. If a site has problems, don't let that put you off. In fact, you should welcome it, because if you see sites with problems and they're difficult problems, the answer is work out how to solve the problem, not shy away from it because there's a problem there. If the site is perfect, we won't look at it because we know that there'll be a lot of people bidding and that all of the margin will be bid out of it. If it's difficult to work out, it's going to put other people off. And one of the keys that we try and do is that we try and just put ourselves into a position where we're the linchpin, we're the thing that's needed in order to deliver the value in that site. And when you're the linchpin in the whole equation, then you can also extract maximum value from it. Patience is key. So we quite often look at stuff and we don't just discard it, but we just say, that's an interesting site, but actually, you know what, there are too many other people looking at that right now. We'll just put it in the wait and see basket and just keep keeping an eye on it. So often the best sites are those which have been hanging around for a long time, and almost always sites which are newly on the market are overpriced. So we shy away from those. You need to get really comfortable with probability and fallback scenarios. I talked about one-way bets earlier, and I think that's really important in terms of how you structure your thinking about the projects that you go after. Don't ever allow yourself to be rushed or pushed. If you don't like the way that the deal that is going, there are always more fish in the sea. Take your time, do your research, and get it right. Think a lot, but when you act very quickly. So it's important to be able to act quickly, but you want to have that well thought through before you actually jump in and do whatever it is that you've decided you're going to land on. And finally, I think this is an art, not a science, but it's an art that's backed by 2 things, practice and analysis. So really important that you're good at those spreadsheet skills, that you understand exactly what the financial drivers of any development that you're involved in are. But it is, to some extent, when you're looking at sites, it's a pattern recognition thing. I look at sites and I can very quickly see opportunities for enhancement because I've looked at other sites and I see the same thing over and over again. And a good architect and a good planning consultant who focus on those things can also help you do that. They will see things that you won't see because they've got the experience to do it. So just to finish off, a couple of parting thoughts. I like this quote. It's often attributed to Charles Darwin. It wasn't something that he said, but it's a summary of what he said. It's not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent. It's the one that's most adaptable. I think that's particularly the case right at the moment. We need to adapt to survive, but I think it applies to this topic, value enhancement. You need to be able to be adaptive. You need to be creative, and you need to find things that other people can't see. And just to summarize what we do, this is how we summarize what we do, but really this is about how we drive value through our business. So it's really the end point of design-led development. We build inspiring, sustainable buildings that transform the places they're built in and designed around the way that people live their lives. Really what that says is that philosophy is how we deliver maximum value in the projects that we develop. So that's me. Thanks, and I'll hand back to Neil.
Thank you, Evan. That was great. And I think we've got a few questions racking up here, but I took a little bit too much of your time earlier on. So I'm just gonna fire through one question now, and then we'll pick up more questions later on after David's spoken. So just a quick question about Gloucester being a particularly great case study. How are you looking to fund that particular one?
We're already partway through it. It's funded with a combination of senior debt and mezzanine, and we crowdfunded some equity in that project as well. So yeah. The funding structure on that one's pretty complex. So it's probably not a question for now.
It's a great added.
But I mean, sorry, probably. I mean, well, I don't know what's behind that question. But maybe what whoever asked the question is thinking is, how do you finance something which has an outline consent? Most senior lenders will do that, and so we financed it with a senior lender, and then we restructured it once we got the planning enhancements.
Yeah, and that's, I guess that's really the thing, isn't it? It's about understanding the steps that you can take. Not only is planning's not set in stone, but your funding strategy isn't necessarily set in stone. There are ways of refinancing and tweaking and changing as your development matures, if you like. Yeah,
and look, I think it's senior lenders don't want to be in projects for a long time, and so I think it wouldn't be the first time we've swapped senior lender partway through a project. I think you don't want to do it halfway through a build phase, but it's a logical point where you get an enhancement to the planning consent to then maybe restructure that with somebody else.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Evan. That was great, and I'm sure there'll be bags more questions for you if you can hang around a bit later on.
Sure.
So my next speaker this evening, or our next speaker this evening, if Evan is a king within his field, then this man is definitely a kingmaker. If you look through his CV, I mean, what is he? He's a qualified barrister, a solicitor, a planning consultant, a chartered surveyor. I mean, there is not a lot that this guy doesn't know about the planning system. In fact, I understand that the government actually write policy just so David Kemp has something to read in the evenings before bed. So I'd just like to welcome along David Kemp of DRK Planning, who will talk through his processes.
Thanks very much, Neil. Yes, I am just going to share my screen. Yeah, government has certainly been keeping us on our toes recently, and seems to be changing the goalposts every 5 minutes. So, I'm just going to go through, in terms of planning, how to maximise returns and how we had the approach that we've taken. So just a little bit about me and a bit about our practice. I personally have been in planning and property for probably just over 20 years. As Neil says, a bit of a mixed background, partly in law as a barrister and a solicitor, in private practice and in public practice, because I've worked as a senior and principal planning lawyer for a number of local authorities, some in London, some outside, and also partly in valuation and agency initially, which is where I started, and then went into planning. Our own practice, or my practice, has been operating for about 10 years. We do mostly residential-led development, but we've also done some mixed use and commercial-led development as well, mostly focused in London and South East, but we also work on projects. We've done projects in Midlands, Northwest, Southwest, South Coast as well, anything from sort of small title splits up to about 150 units. So there's a couple of examples down at the bottom there. One is a recent consent for 9 units and commercial space in North London. And the one on the left-hand side was a partial redevelopment and change of use of IBM headquarters in Farnborough. It was a couple of years ago, up to about 113 units. And you know, we work with all manner of clients, mostly with SMEs, but we also work with larger firms as well, like Hill Homes, Derwent Valley. We advise them on their Tottenham Court hub during Crossrail. Vivian Westwood, we got new offices secured for them in Wandsworth, and CPC Group we advised or helped to advise in their High Court litigation against Qatari DR a few years ago. So that was a Candy Brothers. So I'm sort of going to be the planning side of what Evan has gone through, and in terms of many of the things that he and Neil were touching upon in terms of managing cost and managing risk, that's very much key to the approach that we try to take with our clients as well. And in that sense, we take a three-part approach here, starting with a very high-level planning review. So, for instance, if a client was going to come to us and say, we've got this site here, what do you think is the best way to approach this? Then obviously it's important for us as planning consultants to appreciate that delicate balance that's got to be struck between exploring the potential in areas that might be, as Evan says, a little bit hairy, but also making sure that we do so in a way that makes the client comfortable with exploring that risk, putting a little bit of risk money and time into it initially, and then as they get more comfortable, as we get more comfortable as a team with a degree of risk, then it makes more sense for the client, their investors, etc., to throw a bit more at it in terms of time and cost. So the initial step would normally be a high-level planning review, a light touch. We're basically looking at the principle of development. So, for instance, this site on the right-hand side, we got consent tail end of last year on that. That was a 10,000 square foot office building, and we increased the size of that, I think, to almost or just over 50% of its size by the time that we'd finished. And we did that through a series of steps. So we went through permitted development, which is the next stage up. And then once we'd secure permitted development, we had a fallback that we went on to pre-application as well. And that fallback position is critical when you're working on the planning side of schemes as well, and looking to explore that potential, because as Evan says, it gives you a safety net. And if it all goes a bit pear-shaped in terms of the planning, at least as long as it works out and it cuts its teeth on the numbers on the PD side, then it provides a platform and the right environment to be able to explore the planning risks as well. So once it makes sense in terms of the principle of development, then we start focusing on the numbers, and that's where we start to do a detailed initial planning review. And as Evan said, it's quite right that the client needs to lead principally on that. So we would need to be framing that investigation with a sense of what the client has in terms of their knowledge of what works in terms of the market, what uses work, what mix of uses, what dwelling sizes work, and what dwelling mixes work as well. Because planning is not an academic exercise that anybody does for the fun of it. It's there to release and unlock value. So we need to know where that value is. And then that initial planning review is very much a case of working with the architect then to frame the risks around the design and advise their feasibility exercise, their design feasibility exercise. So architects will look to optimize the capacity of the site, but will be doing so within a way that we know has a good chance of securing planning, and that all is done in the context of a framework provided by the client that also makes sense in terms of the numbers and the end and the exit values as well. So it's about client, architect, and planner really working together in a trident and carrying that forward. The scheme that you see the picture of there, we got PD for it for 25 units initially, and that was pretty much its purchase price value. In that was the value that it was given to it by agents. It sort of equated to 25 units, but then we knew we could increase that and max it out to 27 units. So it increased the fallback position and the security provided by that, and then eventually up to 44 units on full planning. There is an element with pre-app of uncertainty, but also important to establish that relationship with officers and a degree of playing the game with pre-app. A lot of people don't believe in the pre-app system, and it can be very uneven in terms of its results sometimes as well. But I think these days it is important. It's very, very different kind of exercise now to how it would normally have been outside COVID, and you need an awful lot of patience. And it's usually, if you didn't start off with a beard at the beginning of the exercise, you probably end up with a beard by the end of it, or a few grey hairs. And then you go into fuller outline applications as well, and need to think about community engagement and political risk. And when I say political, I'm talking about member involvement or the prospect of going on to committee afterwards. So summarising in terms of a three-step process is kind of the way we tend to think here. So this initial step, this assessment step of looking at the market, what makes sense in terms of what works in the market, but also then trying to iteratively compare that to council priorities, because although the client might say in market terms, this is what we're looking at and this is what we would like to make work, that might be a complete non-starter in terms of policy. And therefore, if that's the way you're going to go, you're going for a high-risk strategy, and you might only be pushing treacle uphill. And that'll just drain costs and time and energy and resources. And it might be then at that stage, we need to have a rethink and sit down with the client and think about whether or not they can consider any other sort of market-based approach. But then that also needs to frame itself around the acquisition. So when we're starting to think about strategy at a very, very early stage, that initial stage one, high level or detailed assessment stage, that's when we're kind of giving advice, lead advice to the client about, well, how will it work in terms of, do we go PD first? Is there pre-app? Then we go into full app. How long will that take? And if the client is trying to negotiate a deal, they need to know when they might need to do the exchange buy, how they work with delayed completion. If they're trying to negotiate an option, what's the period of the option? Is there a need to also keep open the opportunity to extend or purchase an extension to that option if they want to or need to go on to appeal afterwards? If in looking at the opportunity, there's a possibility that affordable housing contribution may need to be paid, but the land value of the site in its existing use value is very low, and there's no alternative use value established by another consent, such as a prior approval at this stage, then it may be that in order to take that opportunity forward, and this is quite common with greenfield redevelopment or new house sites outside the urban framework, then sometimes you may have to look at perhaps a joint venture with the landowner, so that they share in the risks and they share in the costs afterwards. Because you pay too much on the purchase price, then you are really putting yourself out there and on the hook for the possibility of having to bear the burden of an affordable housing contribution that doesn't stack up, doesn't make sense against what you initially paid for the site, because the council won't use the purchase price in some cases to establish the affordable housing contribution. They might mark the land value significantly below that, because that purchase price represents your developer risk. It doesn't necessarily represent the land value on an existing use value, alternative use value basis. And then when we talk about going in to explore PD, prior approval, that's when we're into step two. And that step two approach in green, that's where we're using strategy. We're thinking about how much needs to be invested in terms of other consultants who are involved, highways consultants, viability consultants, daylight and sunlight consultants, for instance, and how long that will all take. And then we get onto the action and review, getting our hands dirty in the planning process. An example of how we use the planning system sometimes and this was one where the client had already had the site, but it might be a similar situation where a client has a site, they try to do something, don't get planning for it, and it's available, it's on the market. So a failed application sometimes provides an opportunity for resubmission and therefore enhancement. And in this case, the image on the left, on the top left, is the initial proposal for 3 units, so 2 at the front and 1 at the rear. And the council turned it down because the units were regarded as too poor in terms of daylight and sunlight, that too poor in terms of outlook and aspect, and also the side passage created privacy issues in relation to the rear of one of the units at the front as well. So there were a number of problems there. But if you flip it and you read the decision in the right way, you can say, well, if that's a problem, but I did this differently to address that problem, then I could come up with a completely different scheme. And actually what we did was we flipped the units around, so you didn't have bedrooms at the front, we had bedrooms at the rear. It made more sense that way. We have more private space there. We reduced the size of this of the rear extension slightly, and so we could have these small pocket gardens there as well. But then also, in order to sell the idea of these pocket gardens to the council and make them more comfortable about it, CGIs as well are really important, creating that vision. Even though the vision was on a small scale in this case with these CGIs, it helped provide an extra layer of comfort to the council, and we got this through in 8 weeks. Challenging sites, people walking away from challenging sites. This is a good example of it. This was the CGI you see on top on the right-hand side. That is pretty much how the development has ended up, but the building on the left was an absolute ruin at the beginning. It was the former home of the Blackwell family in Harrow Wealdstone, and you can see the land dropped away significantly to the rear, and you can see the shot from the rear in real life at the bottom, and there actually was a disused basement that was pretty much burrowed away in vegetation, and very difficult to see at first, but it was an opportunity for value enhancement as well by increasing the volume, and it allowed us to increase the volume by about 20%, which is very, very unusual, particularly given the context of this site. The ruin was locally listed. There was another locally listed building on the site. The other small building you see on the CGI to the right was a grade 2 listed coach house and stable. So it was it wasn't short of heritage assets on the site, and also it was in the green belt and riven with TPOs all over the place as well. So in this case, you've got to look for that theme that unlocks challenging sites. And when you're talking to public authorities, you're talking to local authorities, you've got to find something that's very much in the public interest. So when you're having a conversation with a vendor, for instance, it's a financial thing, or it might be a time thing. With a council, it'll be a public interest thing such as heritage. So we put this across as a heritage restoration project, and then we got buy-in from the top down, from a head of planning level, and that carries the momentum of junior officers. You can do similarly with town centres on a renewal basis as well. And as I've mentioned, we used basements and lower floors, revealing former ground levels in order to add floor levels and add space. And similarly on sloping sites, changes in topography. In town centres, you can use roof spaces, mezzanine levels, etc. It is a long and can be a long drawn out process sometimes, and it's an iterative process, and you need patience for this. Cannot stress that enough. But it's about building consensus and common ground. Ideally, if you are going to go to committee, you can't always avoid going to committee. You want to know you pretty much won the argument before you get to committee. And you know, there's a bit of lobbying that needs to be done there, and it's also about selling the arguments for the proposal in the right way and a public interest sense as well. You try and avoid political involvement or adverse political involvement as much as you can, and also appeal is very, very risky these days. I find that the planning inspectorate seems to have increased its uptake for new inspectors from the local authorities, and they are a bit local authority friendly and developer averse in my experience. And it's sometimes better to try and engage at local level. No less frustrating, can be time consuming, particularly in today's world of just having to email officers and not being able to get them on the phone. But at the end of the day, it's sometimes cheaper and more, has a higher prospect of getting success than on appeal. I think this is my last slide. This was when we got through for Equigroup in Crawley, Zurich House. First of all, we got prior approval for 44 flats. It's not just about gaining value, it's also about protecting value. So gaining value, we obviously got more value here by another new units on 9 new units on the roof. In Crawley, they have an affordable housing threshold of 5 units or above. So there was an affordable housing contribution of about 50,000 on this. If this was started off and if they commenced the build works on the additional floor on top a little bit later, then we might have been able to go back in with a prior approval application under the new air rights provisions introduced last summer for exactly the same thing, but because affordable housing doesn't apply in those cases, then we'd have been able to almost, in effect, cancel that £50,000. But worth noting that in this scheme, the advice from agents was that although we weren't proposing in some of the rooms, which are, or some of the units, which were 1-bed units, an extra bedroom, at least if we had an extra room which was allocated as a study on the plans, then they would be worth, they would at least add another £15,000 potentially. So there was significant value added by protecting those studies in those 5 units that had them in the new floor. So yeah, it's
which is sorry, Dave. I was going to say, which is shockingly one of those things that that you can get caught up with planning departments when they think you're trying to sneak in another bedroom.
yes, and actually they were very resistant about it, and we had to by degrees reduce the size of it. I actually even ended up taking a photo of my own study at home and measuring it and trying to prove to them that actually by the time we got all the furniture in, it's too small for a bed in any event. It was a bit of an uphill battle to try and get it, but it was extremely worth it to the client to protect that value, particularly in these uncertain times, and the client are subject to an affordable housing contribution of £50,000. But as this quote puts it, if it were easy, everybody would be doing it, but not everybody is. And because you are working in an area where the oxygen is thinner, there's probably less competition as well. But you've got to know what you're doing, and you've got to have a good team around you, and you've got to do your DD. Great.
Well, thank you ever so much there, David. I think that was another round of great case studies. We've got a handful of questions, and I'm very conscious that we have hit the 8 o'clock mark, but we are happy to try and answer a couple of questions for everybody if people want to hang around for a little bit longer.
Hi, I hope you're enjoying the free content. My name is Matt Siddell. I started Qandor in 2017. In 2020, we launched a property academy called Tropolis. If you want to know how you can come and join our fantastic network and work with the wonderful people that we help and support, then click the link below and book your call with me today.
So what I will do is I will quickly just jump to the top, and this one I'm guessing, David, is possibly going to be best to head towards you. Under what condition would you submit more than one planning application option at the same time?
Well, actually, the example that I showed you before, right at the beginning of the 113 unit scheme, we ended up sort of doing that. So you basically got 2 applications going side by side in parallel. What tends to happen is you do a pre-app for the scheme that you really want to go for, your maxed out scheme. The officers knock you back, but you still think it's worth fighting for. And the maxed out scheme, for example, might be something where it's based on the same footprint, but it's adding the value either internally within the same envelope or an extra floor. So you put both applications at the same time, you run them parallel. The lower scheme gets through. So you've established a bar, you can start on site, you don't have to waste time, and you can kick off with the tendering and the construction works and the foundation works whilst the other scheme is going through, which might very well be refused. And if it does, then you see if you can get it through on appeal. And if you do, then it's not held up the works in the meantime, because you've already been able to start more or less the same scheme on the same footprint on the first application. And you just swap over to that second scheme when you can.
Yeah. Ace. Right, this one's for you, Evan. What research do you do with your future residents, for example, to understand what premium they may be willing to pay at a cost per square foot?
So we do a lot. I mean, in essence, that is, when we do an appraisal on site, one of the first things we look at is what are the end values. So we'll look very closely at comparables in the market that we're selling into. We'll look at where the demand is, and that feeds into our residual appraisal for the site. We do a lot of work, and I think the thing that about site selection is, and one of the reasons for us why provenance is important, is it's a lot of time and effort that's involved in actually appraising a site properly. You need to work out exactly what the thing is going to sell for, what it's going to cost to build it. You need to make sure that you've captured all of the possible costs and problems associated with the site, and then you need to put that into an appraisal. And you won't know everything at the beginning, so you'll have to go off and find answers to questions. It's a very detailed process. It takes a lot of time and effort, and so that is just one piece of the overall equation. Could I just jump back actually to the question that David answered as well, actually?
Yeah, of course.
To do with multiple applications at the same time, because that's something we're looking at on our Kennington site currently. So the question we're considering is, if we had to go to appeal on our apart hotel application, would we submit another application in parallel with that? I think it can depend on how policy works as well. You might find that by submitting an application that you could negatively influence your appeal on your first application. So you really have to understand how the policy of whatever the second thing you're applying for interacts with the policy of the first thing you're applying for. It's a really important point. But I think also, as David was alluding to, in essence, he was talking about putting strategy. So, can you do one thing while you're doing another? And I think that thinking about planning as a strategy, as a series of steps rather than a single step, is really important in trying to extract maximum value out of things. So sorry, I answered two questions at once there. But.
Yeah, actually, Evan raises a good point, and he answers the first part as well, because we're having a similar debate on a live application at the moment as well. And sometimes it works for you, sometimes it might not be good. And it also depends upon the likely degree of objector opinion on the scheme in any event. And you've got to weigh up whether or not it just looks as if you're playing games with the planners and with members. There's nothing wrong in doing so, but it can come across badly, and you kind of got to manage the perceptions of people within the application when you're going through it as well.
That's absolutely right. Sorry, you don't want to be going to appeal on things, so you want to manage that relationship. Sorry, go on.
So I'm just going to do a quick for the organisers just to make sure that we get the next slide up, and then we'll pick back up some questions. So just a big thank you to everybody today. Thank you for attending, and thank you for the guys that have shared with us. Today's webinar was recorded and will be available to re-watch. Our next webinar will take place on Wednesday, the 10th of February from 7 to 8 p.m. and visit qandor.org/free training to register for future webinars and to watch recordings. Please complete the short survey at the end of this webinar and join us next time to see the Qandor webinar on HMOs, how to utilize space and maximize returns. So I think today has been really good, and we're happy to pop through a couple more of the questions before everybody nips off. But conscious that need to make sure that we let everybody know that there is another webinar coming up next month. Right, so just jumping on to another question. We've picked that one up. Is there any how would a PD application, for example, affect full planning in the eyes of the planning department, David? Is there anything that is there anything negative to be said about submitting PD and then wanting to go on to a fuller application at a later date?
No, not necessarily. No, I mean, and quite often, the thing is, you might be in a situation where you submit PD and a full application at the same time. And you might do so because there might be some doubt as to whether or not the PD application is going to go through, but you don't want to lose time and waiting to see the result of that before you put in your full application. So you're sort of hedging your bets. If you were to do that, always make sure that you submit your full application with something along the lines of the following wording, that this application is submitted without prejudice to the PD application that's also been submitted. And worth cross-referencing the two between them, because you're going to probably be speaking to the same case officer, and they're going to be wondering, well, why have I received one PD application and one full application? So sometimes you often have to explain that to the officer. But by and large, they completely accept that often the reason why you're submitting a PD application is to establish that fallback position. It's particularly useful in schemes where you're looking at some form of commercial PD to resi, obviously often office to resi, and most councils will have a policy that says that if you are going from offices outside the office use class to non-commercial uses, they normally have a policy against it, requiring some period of marketing, etc. So what you're trying to get across to them is that, well, we have this as a fallback in any event, and you should take that into account and give it significant weight. So it helps to chip away at the likelihood of officers giving significant weight to their planning policy and stopping you from moving over as part of a wider scheme.
Actually,
okay, I think we're going to...
Oh, sorry, go on. If I could just feed into that.
I was going to say, Evan, I think we're going to struggle for much more time. So I've got an interesting question for both of you here, actually, that I think it'd be good to hear both of your answers on. And Evan, the answer is probably you've got it anyway. But if you had 500,000 to invest, where and what might you look to buy right now and why? Let's start with Evan, please.
I put it into one of the existing schemes that we're working on. It's very difficult for me to define what works and what doesn't. What we do is extremely bespoke. So we're buying something at the moment, and we're buying it for its red book valuation. The red book valuation on it is in excess of 8 million, and we're buying it for around 6 million. That's a good deal because we're buying it for less than what it's worth. If that site was for sale for 10 million, then we wouldn't look at it. So I would put my money into good deals. Is probably the answer. That's
well-researched project, isn't it? Really, that's the thing.
You know,
but there's well-researched.
Exactly. And look, you know, that particular deal that I'm talking about, we've known about it for over 3 years. I've been working quite intensively on it for about a year. So it's not an overnight thing. It takes a lot of time, and it's a very complex situation, and that's why there's value in it.
Yeah. David, how about a sector? Is there anything that we should be looking out from a class use point of view that you think there's something juicy going on there that could be making us all millionaires in a couple of months' time?
Well, I'd certainly be looking for opportunities again in town centres where there are particularly sort of health centres or gyms or something like which are struggling. And dental surgeries, etc., because currently they fall in use class E, and the government is considering opening up a new PD right, which won't be limited in terms of size and be available in conservation areas to go for a change of use from those uses, and also including light industrial uses to residential, and that's being consulted on. The government hasn't actually made up its mind on it yet, but if I was a betting man, I'd say they'd probably go for it. And that would have to come into force from the 1st of August. Another thing that I'm looking at with partners that I work with is acquiring these small kind of sort of lock-up garages, you know, the ones with the asbestos roofs that you can't fit a car in, etc. And you can get groups of those, then there's an opportunity for some sort of mini renewal, and there's all sorts of positives about displacing those and coming up with sustainable development in often areas where there's good public transport links as well.
Yeah. Okay, well, we've picked out most bits. There's a couple of quite specific ones which I'll just bring up. One person asking about an office to resi scheme that they're looking at. They want to do it under PD, but it's in flood zone 3, and so the planning department is suggesting we go for full application. I guess that one falls really under the remit of amenity for the residents, and you know, it doesn't, by the sounds of things, it won't meet the requirements set within the current office to resi.
You need to get a good flood risk consultant involved in it. If it's only a change of use, then you might be able to still change use, because the sequential test, there are different tests within flood risk assessment. The sequential test, which normally applies to new built development, wouldn't apply. And in fact, sometimes the flood risk mapping that the council are looking at is inaccurate, and there are other opportunities and other reasons why. In fact, we got prior approval through for a scheme in Waverley District Council for Equa Group a couple of years back, change of use of offices to 22 units, and that was partly flood zone 2 and partly flood zone 3, backed onto near river. And it's not necessarily a no. It gets a lot more tricky with where you're doing new build development, but there are schemes where if you're doing that, you sometimes have an undercroft instead. You don't have the residential at ground floor, and you can design it in a way that might be able to overcome those problems.
Okay, I'm going to ask one last question now.
Sorry. Okay.
I'm going to ask one last question for Evan.
Sure.
Where is it? Do you have any real life example of disaster projects where a client has acquired a site with an appraisal done which is totally opposite to the local development policy and ended up badly for? So I guess that's more, you know, one that you found somewhere, a real disaster that somebody had put together, and you picked it up at a later date.
Wow. So I mean, when we buy stuff, it's pretty difficult to do stuff if it's opposite to the development policy. When we buy stuff, we either buy stuff based on its existing use value or with an existing consent. Look, development projects do. No, I don't really have any examples I can throw at you of that. But I think when things don't always go right on a development project, you've just got to push through and find a solution to that. And we do our research very carefully on anything that we buy before we buy it, and so we make sure that we cover off all the downside risks. You know, I always say there are 3 rules in property development. One is don't lose money. The second one is don't lose money, and the third one is don't lose money. That's where you need to be thinking first. You think about how can you minimize your risk, and then you think about where's the upside. Yeah,
and I would probably sort of add to that and say that the reality is that the disasters on that level don't normally make it into the planning system. It's probably more that somebody like me would pick it up earlier on and try and get it through to a point where somebody like Evan. Well, in fact, no. If Evan looks at any of my projects, then I'm going to have a little question with myself about what I'm doing. But somebody who buys fantastic, perfect planning applications, when it falls on their desks, that will have already gone through the sort of fixed process that guys like me do. Okay, well, I'm going to wrap this up now and just say thank you again to Evan and David for answering the questions. There's a couple that we might be able to just do a couple of type answers to, but I think we've picked out all of the juicy ones that we can get reasonable answers to without putting anybody under too much pressure to release all of their secrets. And obviously, just a final slide to ask people if they're interested in in the membership. As a member, I find that I get a huge amount of benefit from it. I get to work with fantastic people like David and Evan on a regular basis, and it's certainly brought lots of value to my life. So thank you again.
So if you enjoyed this video, why not check out some of our other videos? I recently interviewed lots of fantastic people. There's loads of good content in there. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you in the next video.